Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you're well. It's Rabbi Akiva Males. Today is Wednesday, and we are trying to go to share screen. We're getting ready for Parshas Emor. Parshas Emor is coming up this week. Today is the 11th of May, and we're getting ready for Parshas Emor. Parshas Emor contains a lot of information about Kohanim, and towards the end of the Parsha, it contains a lot of information about the Yom Tovim. I want to focus about the Coin Guttal today because there are some fascinating comments from the Rambam, from Maimonides, that talk to us that I want to share with you. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So I'm going to start by reading these psukim. The psukim tell us in Vayikra, it's Emor Perak Chaf Aleph. The psukim tell us V'Kohen Gadol Me'achav. So we're talking about the Coin Guttal. We're talking about the high priest, you might say, the Coin Guttal. So it says Asher Yutzak al Rosho Shemen HaMishcha. He's had that special anointing oil on him. And he's been inaugurated that he's wearing the special clothing of the Coin Guttal. So he's talking about if a close relative dies, he doesn't go through many of the mourning observances. He wouldn't let his hair grow long for Shloshem. He wouldn't tear Kriya. And he also would not be able to be metame. He would not be able to contaminate himself in any fashion for any relatives, laviv limo lo yitma, even for parents. Mikdash lo yitzei, and during that Shiva period, he wouldn't leave the Beis HaMikdash. Again, this is special for the Coin Guttal. Lo yichalos mikdash elokav, ki nezer shem mishchas elokav alav. He's got that special anointing oil on him. Ani Hashem. So there's some special laws when it comes to mourning that apply to the Coin Guttal that do not apply to other Kohanim. Okay, now I've bolded. The Torah tells us something specific about the woman that he needs to marry. V'hu, and a Coin Guttal, isha b'vsuleha yikach. He's only allowed to marry a woman who is a bisulah, a woman who is a virgin, someone who has never been with another man before. Amano grusha v'chala zana es ela lo yikach. He can't marry a widow. He can't marry a divorcee. He can't marry a woman who may have been with another person before. He's got to marry a virgin, a woman who's never been with anyone else. And his offspring will never be desecrated. I'm the Lord. Okay, so the Torah is very specific, telling us that a Coin Guttal has rules on him that do not apply to a regular Kohen, both in terms of Avelus, in terms of how he mourns, but also in terms of the woman who he's going to marry. Whereas a regular Kohen just cannot marry a grusha. A regular Kohen cannot marry a woman who has been divorced, but he could marry an almana. A regular Kohen could marry a widow. When it comes to a Coin Guttal, he's not allowed to marry both a grusha, a divorcee. He's also not allowed to marry an almana, a widow. The only woman he's allowed to marry is a basulah, a virgin, someone who's never been intimate with another man before. Now, as far as reasons for this, the Torah doesn't give us a reason. We've quoted before that the Balei Tosos offer an astounding theory. And their theory is as follows. Their theory is that the Coin Guttal is the one person who enters the inner sanctum of the Beis HaMikdash one day a year on Yom Kippur. And when someone is in that inner sanctum, their words could have a lot of power. And the prayers that they utter in that room could have a lot of power. So the Balei Tosfos suggest, it's in the Moshav Zakanim, they suggest as follows. It's astounding. They say that the fear is if a Coin Guttal was allowed to marry an almana, a widow, the same way a regular Cohen is, here's the fear. Maybe you'll have a Coin Guttal who's had his eyes on a married woman. He's attracted to her, and he knows there's no way he could marry her. There's no way he could have her as her own, because even if the marriage is to break up by divorce, he's a Cohen. He can't marry a grusha, a divorcee. But he's thinking if her husband would die, then she's an almana, and a Cohen's allowed to marry an almana. Now, how do you cause a person to die without murdering him? He's not going to be a murderer, but he knows one day a year he'll be in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, in the inner sanctum of the Beis HaMikdash on Yom Kippur. Maybe he'll offer a tefillah, he'll offer a prayer that Shmerel should pass away this year, hoping that he will be able to be with his widow. So to make certain that that will never happen, to take that option away, and to make certain that no Coin Guttal would ever utter such a prayer in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Torah says he can't marry an almana. He cannot marry a widow. That's what the Balei Tosa suggests, which is astounding, because here it is, we tend to think, okay, people are hardwired, they've got temptation, and sometimes their temptation gets the better, takes control against their better judgment. But you think, okay, if there's one place in the world where a person might be free from that, it might be the Beis Hamikdash. If there might be one day that might be more powerful to motivate a person to just keep their mind out of the gutter, it might be Yom Kippur. Now you have the combination of Beis Hamikdash on Yom Kippur in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and Tosafos is saying that maybe Hashem was worried that a Coin Guttal, even in those circumstances, is going to be thinking about that married woman who he'd like to be with. And that's why Hashem takes the option of marrying an almana, a widow, off the table. That's just astounding. And it reminds us just how hardwired we are to run with temptation, and how careful all of us need to be just to make certain that temptation doesn't get the best of us, even if it's there are numerous reasons why we might think why we should have our passions at bay. It's Yom Kippur, it's the Beis Hamikdash, and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Even with all that, Tosafos says we understand the nature of the beast. And the nature of the beast is passion and temptation can get the best of anybody in any place. And that's it. So that's a wild idea. That's not on our sheets, but we've spoken about that before. It's from the Balei Tosafos. What I want to focus on today is Rambam. This week I was looking at some dinim in the Rambam, what he says about the Coin Guttal, and he writes some items that I had never seen before. Okay, the pasuk tells us that a Coin Guttal, he has to, if he's getting married, he has to marry a basula, but I never really thought about the implications of that. Let's take a look. Let's look at the Rambam here. So on the bottom of page 1, this is the Rambam. It's in the section in the Mishnah Torah, Surei Bia. It's talking about forbidden relationships. And here he's talking about the Coin Guttal. So he says, it's in chapter 17, it's Halacha Yud Gimel 13, Mitzvah Saseh, there is a positive command in the Torah, Al Coin Guttal, that the Coin Guttal Sheyisa Na'ara Besula. He has to marry a young woman who is a Besula, a virgin. And now he goes on to say that means she's got to be specifically between the age of 12 and 12 and a half. So wow. Let's take a look. He says, Misha Tigbor, when she reaches maturity, when she's already over 12 and a half, Teyaser love, she would not fall into that category. The Torah says that this Coin Guttal has to marry a Basula, so she is a young woman. So but once she's already mature, that would not qualify. Shnemar, because the Torah says, V'hu isha b'vsula yikach, he's got to marry a lady who is a virgin. So the Rambam says, what does that imply? Isha, the Torah says she's an isha, that means a lady. Lo katana, she's not a minor, she's not a kid. But then it says b'vsuleha, while she's a virgin, that means v'lo bogeres. That seems to imply she's not already at the age of maturity. Haketzad, so who qualifies? Yatzas miklal katnus ulechlal bagrus lo bazu nara. So he says this has to be someone who is not a katana. She's not a minor, but she's also not at the age of maturity. Who is that? That's a nara. That is a young maiden, someone between the age of 12 and 12 and a half. So that's just wow, just fascinating right there. What Rambam's pointing out is that talk about this Coin Guttal, if he's going to be getting married while he's in the status of Coin Guttal, not only is it that he's got to find a Basula, but it has to be in a very specific age range. And now listen to this next point. I was totally unaware of this. Ve'eno, and furthermore, Ve'eno no se shtei nashim la'olam ka'achas. A Coin Guttal can never be married to two women at the same time. Now we know under biblical law, Minat Torah, someone is allowed to be married to two women, assuming he can support them and he has the resources to do so. Someone could just look at some of our avos, some of the patriarchs and matriarchs. They were in marriages such as that. So by Torah law, someone could be married to two women at the same time. It was Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershon. It was over 1,000 years ago in Europe, where they said this cannot continue. This may have worked at a certain point in human history. It would no longer works today. So that's why you do not see this anymore. Interestingly enough, the Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershon was accepted in Ashkenaz. It never was something that was accepted in many of the Sephardic countries, many of the North African countries. This was not something in many of the Middle Eastern countries that where Jews lived amongst Arabs. This was not accepted. So therefore, you had a situation that until 1948, when Jews started coming to Israel from all those countries, so you would have, let's say, in the world of Ashkenaz, there was no such thing as a man being married to two women. But in some of those Middle Eastern or Arabic countries, it still was happening until really 1948. Once they started coming to Israel, so Israel made a rule, listen, we know you're coming from lands where the Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershon that said no marrying two women never kicked in, but there's no way we could all live together in harmony in Israel unless everyone's on the same page. But what they did allow was that if people came into Israel from those Arabic countries and they already were married to two women, they were, so to say, grandfathered in. My father-in-law, Olav Shalom, Leila's dad, he grew up as a young boy. He was born in a displaced persons camp in Europe right after the Holocaust. His parents emigrated to Israel when he was about 2 years old, I believe. And he lived in Nahariya. I'm sorry, Leila said it was 6 months. When he was about 6 months old, they emigrated to Israel. And he grew up in Nahariya in Israel until he was about 11 or 12 years old. And he remembers as a kid in Nahariya, there was it was an absorption center. So there was a lot of waves of immigrants that were coming in. So he came in with his family with a lot of the European immigrants. But later in the 50s, early 50s, that was when a lot of Teimanim, a lot of Yemenites were coming in. And he says he specifically remembers that there were Yemenite families who came in, that there were cases like this where there was a husband and he had more than one wife. And he remembers being in school, in little elementary school kid, and he remembers that there were kids that were in school who were coming from such families. He says, he was a little kid. He was just outside playing, running around. He says, now that he's older, when he was older, he was saying, wow, he would have been so curious just to go over to his friend's house and just see what were the dynamics like. What did that look like? How did they all get along? It's just so hard to comprehend. But be that as it may, there was once a time where everybody, Ashkenazim, Sfardim, everyone, by Torah law, someone was allowed to be married to more than one woman as long as he could support them, they had the resources to do such, and they could work out all the shalom bayis issues. That could not have been simple. So the Rambam is writing, when it comes to the Coin Guttal, Eino noseh shtei nashim le'olam. A Coin Guttal, unlike any other member of Klal Yisrael, could never be married to more than one woman at a time. Shenemar, because look at the pasuk. The pasuk says, Isha, where it says, what did the pasuk say? Going back to Yud Gimel, pasuk Yud Gimel, Hu Isha b'vsula yikach. He takes a woman who is a basula, who is a virgin. So that implies that he takes a woman. He's only allowed to be married to one woman, not to two. That's what Rambam says over here. Now, there's one other place in halacha where this idea comes up about a Coin Guttal not being married to more than one woman, and it's just speaking about Yom Kippur. We're going to get to that right in a second. Let's just skip to on page 2. Let's go to, it says Vayikra 16. That's in Parshas Achrei Mos. That was last week. So the pasuk, I'm sorry, 2 weeks ago. Last week was Kedoshim. So it's Achrei Mos. The pasuk says, it's talking about the Avodah on Yom Kippur, the special service on Yom Kippur. It says about the Coin Guttal, V'kriva Aaron es parachatos asher lo. He brings his bull. And then it says, V'chiper ba'ado uva'ad beiso. And he should initiate atonement for himself and his household. So right beneath there, you'll see the Gemara. The Gemara says, it's quoted from the Sefer Torah to me, but it's quoting the Gemara. What does it mean, ba'ad beiso? Beiso zo ishto. When the pasuk says beiso, that he's atoning for himself and his household, that's a euphemism for his wife. Meaning he's doing kapara, he's doing atonement for him and his wife. Now it says beiso is singular. So it says uvad bayis echad. So beiso is singular. It says that he should atone for himself and his bayis, which we said is a euphemism for wife. It doesn't say beitav, beisav, mean his wives or his houses. It doesn't say that. It says his house. Does that teach us? So it says that a Coin Guttal who's going to be doing the work on Yom Kippur, being involved with Avodah in Yom Kippur, he can only be married to one woman. He cannot be married to two. So look what the Rambam writes over there. This is in the Hilchos Klei Mikdash, where he's talking about Yom Kippur. So he says, we already wrote about the Coin Guttal, that he cannot marry a widow or divorcee, he's got to marry a Basula, a virgin. He's also, a Coin Guttal is not allowed to be married to two women. If he was married to two women, he cannot work on Yom Kippur until he divorces one of them. Why? Because the pasuk specifically says, the Coin Guttal who's going to be doing the avodah on Yom Kippur, he can only be married to one woman. He cannot be married to more than one. So we have this idea about the Coin Guttal that he can only be married to one woman, not more than one. Now, that looks like it's only an issue at Yom Kippur, because on Yom Kippur is when it says v'chiper ba'ado v'ad beiso. But the first Rambam that we saw seems to say, I'm scrolling back to it, the bottom of page 1, it says at the end, ve'eno noseh shtei nashim le'olam ka'achas. A Coin Guttal could never be married to more than one woman at a time. Shenemar, because the pasuk says isha achas v'lo shtayim. It says that he marries a woman, which implies one, not two. So Rambam here extended the din, the law of the Gemara. The Gemara said, yeah, when it comes to Yom Kippur, it's to the avodah, to the service of Yom Kippur, that the Coin Guttal is only married to one woman, not two. That the Gemara clearly tells us that by Yom Kippur, and we saw Rambam says that by Yom Kippur. But the first Rambam that we saw extended that. It's not just Yom Kippur, that the Rambam wants to, that it's at no time in the Coin Guttal be married to more than one woman at a time. Now, this is a bit astonishing because the Gemara never addressed that. So let's see this Ravid. We're at the top of page 2. The Ravid was a contemporary of the Rambam who argued with him quite vocally when he disagreed with him. So here's a piece where he disagrees with him. Let's see what he writes. So Asagas Ravid, these are the glosses of the Ravid to the Rambam. So when the Rambam said, Eino Nosei Beis Nashim, that a Coin Guttal cannot be married to two women, and not just for Yom Kippur, but any other time, any point of the year. Because of a Ravid, the Ravid writes, Lo machvarta zos asvara. I do not hear, this is not solid logic, what Rambam just wrote. Shelo amru b'meseches Yuma, when the Gemara talks about the limitations on a Coin Guttal, it's in the tractate of Yoma, Ela beso amar rachman of lo beis batim. Specifically, when it comes to Yom Kippur, it says, v'chiper ba'ado v'ad beso. That he's got to do kapara for himself and his household, meaning his wife, and it means one, not two. So it says Yom Kippur. From the Gemara, it makes it sound like the only time there's a problem for a Coin Guttal to be married to more than one woman at a time is Yom Kippur. But it sounds like the rest of the year there's not an issue. So he's kind of questioning, where did the Rambam get this from? That Coin Guttal can never be married to two women. So he says, maybe Rambam was just making a logical extension. Because the Coin Guttal's job, he's going to, on Yom Kippur, he needs to only be married to one woman. So maybe what Rambam was saying is, you're right. The Gemara clearly says that the Coin Guttal is only allowed to be married to one woman when it comes to Yom Kippur. So why does Rambam say he's never allowed to be married to two women? What do you mean? The Gemara just said Yom Kippur. Okay, that's, but it's not so much the rest of the year. So let's say he gets married to a second woman. The most he can be married for is going to be just shy of 12 months. That's not fair. That's not nice. So the Rambam's saying, practically speaking, you're right. The Gemara only says that a Coin Guttal can't be married to two women on Yom Kippur, which would seem to imply the other 11 months and 29 days of the year he could be. So Rambam's pretty much saying that you're right, you could be, but don't, because that's not fair. It's not right. He wants to be in a position where we're going to require him to get divorced on Erev Yom Kippur. That's not right. Elashani Motze, but he goes, but the problem is, I found the pasuk in Nach, in Divrei Hayamim, where we seemingly have a Coin Guttal who was married to more than one woman. That's what he's going to say. Elashani Motze, but I'll find this pasuk that's in Nach. We'll see in a minute the context. Vayisal lo Yehoyada, that Yehoyada was a Coin Guttal. Nashim shtayim, he married two women. Vayoled banim ubanos, and had many sons and daughters. So the Ravid is basically trying to make sense of Rambam. Rambam said that a Coin Guttal is never allowed to be married to two women. The question is, what do you mean? The only time the Gemara says that's an issue is on Yom Kippur, which would seem to imply the rest of the year is fine. How do you explain the Rambam? So Ravid says, okay, maybe the way you'll explain the Rambam is, Rambam's given a practical hint. Don't get married to more than one woman because it's not so long till Yom Kippur. It rolls around every year. So it's not fair to get married to two women and then we're going to compel him to get divorced. He's got to choose Well, that's not fair. That's just not right. So therefore, Ravid says that understand the Rambam. But then the problem is there's a pasuk in Navi where it clearly talks about a righteous Coin Guttal was married to two women. What would Rambam do with that? That's what he doesn't know. Let's take a look at that pasuk. It's the bottom of page 2. It's Divrei Hayamim. It's Chronicles, the second sefer, Divrei Hayamim Beis. It's in Perek Chavdal, chapter 24. So we're going to learn about Yoash. So it says, Ben Sheva Shanim Yoash b'malcho. Yoash he was from the Davidic dynasty. Yoash was only 7 years old when he became king. And he reigned for 40 years, meaning when he died at 47. Remember, life expectancy wasn't as great back then as it is now, both between medicine, but also different palace intrigue, wars, whatnot. People did not live as long as what we're used to. So Yoash became king at 7, and he reigned for 40 years. Vishem Imo, who was his mom? Sivya mi Beersheva. So that was his mother. Vayas Yoash hayashar b'nei Hashem kol yimei Yoyada Kohen. Yoash he was a tzaddik. He did everything that was correct in the eyes of God. All the days that Yehoyada was the Coin Guttal. In other words, Yehoyada seems to have been his mentor. So then it says, Vayisa lo Yehoyada. By the way, while we're on the topic of Yehoyada, who was a Coin Guttal, Vayisa lo Yehoyada nashim shtayim. Yehoyada married 2 women, Vayoled bani muvanos, and had many sons and daughters. So what Ravid raises as a question on Rambam is this pasuk straight out in Divrei Hayamim. Is that, again, just to review what's going on here. Rambam introduced this idea that a Coin Guttal cannot be married to 2 women at the same time. Ravid asked the question, what do you mean? That's just when it comes to Yom Kippur, not the rest of the year. I'll tell you, you could be married the rest of the year, but you would have to get divorced before Yom Kippur. So he says, maybe Rambam is just giving a practical advice. Don't get married to more than 1 woman because it's not fair. It's not right. Comes Yom Kippur, you'll have to get divorced. Okay, that's how to defend Rambam. But Ravid ended by saying, well, what's Rambam going to do with this psukim in Divrei Hayamim, where we read about Yehoyada, who was a good person, who was a tzaddik. The pasuk clearly says he was married to 2 women. What are we going to do with that? So I want to share with you something I saw this year that I thought was very, very interesting. So this is the Tosafest Brother. I've been quoting him a lot in this year. This was, again, a set of Sfarim Leila bought for me. It was written by the same author as the Torah Tanima, Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein. So look what he does here. He's going on our pasuk. The Coin Guttal is supposed to marry a virgin, a besula. Now he quotes our Rambam. Pasak, Rambam specifically writes, Shekoin Guttal asur likach shtei nashim. A Coin Guttal cannot marry 2 women. He can't be married to 2 women at the same time. Shenemar, because it says, Yikach isha v'darshina nachasu lo shtayim. So that's what Rambam says, that it says, Kim b'sula me'amar yikach isha, which implies he's allowed to marry 1 wife, not 2. And then the Ravid, he asks Shamba Sagos, and also Tosi Shalom says, Hikshu also. Ravid asks a very good question. The pasuk to Divrei Hayamim Beis, the pasuk in Chronicles, it says, V'yisa lo Yehoyada nashim shtayim. It says Yehoyada was the Coin Guttal, married 2 women. Who are your Coin Guttal? Yehoyada was the high priest. And that's why Ravid does not like this law of the Rambam. He agrees that a Coin Guttal can't be married to 2 women on Yom Kippur, but the rest of the year, it doesn't seem that there's any prohibition in place. Where did Rambam get this from? You want to tell me there's a prohibition in place? Then how do you explain Yehoyada? So let's see what he says. Next paragraph. You will find numerous answers in the commentaries of the Ravid, in the commentaries of Rambam, rather. The ones who want to defend Rambam, you'll find numerous answers to this question. Kimo, for example, maybe what it means is, Yehoyada wasn't married to 2 women at the same time. He married wife A, let's call her Rachel. Rachel tragically passed away. So then Yehoyada married wife B, let's call her Leah. So what happens is, the pasuk could say about Yehoyada, Yehoyada was married to 2 women. It doesn't mean at the same time. In the course of Yehoyada's life, he was married to 2 women. That's one answer that's given for this. Lacher Shigirsha. Maybe the first wife, Rachel, maybe she didn't die. Maybe Yehoyada and Rachel didn't have a good marriage. So they got divorced. And now Yehoyada's single. So he married a second woman. He married Leah. Maybe that's what's going on. Oh, or perhaps maybe what the pasuk was talking about was that Yoyada was married to two women when he was a regular Kohen. Only later in life did he become a Coin Guttal, and maybe at that point, he would have had to divorce one of them. So these are three answers that are out there to try to explain Rambam. Now let's see the next paragraph. Other people, there are other answers given about the other question that Ravid asked. How do you explain by Yoyada what the pasuk says? The pasuk says that when it comes to Yom Kippur, the Coin Guttal who's performing the Avodah Yom Kippur can only have one wife. The Darshu Beiso Zuishto. So it means the Coin Guttal who's operating on Yom Kippur only has one wife. So how did that work? Because some of the commentaries write, maybe Yoyada did this, that he was married to two women, and then what happened? Erev Yom Kippur, he divorced one of them. That one of the classic commentators to Rambam is called Magid Mishnah. He brings down all these answers. But you can see from his words, he's not satisfied with any of those answers. So let's just go through what the answers are. Again, here was the problem. Rambam said this idea that a Coin Guttal can never be married to two women. Now we know from the Gemara, you can't be married to two women on Yom Kippur. But where do we get this idea? You can't be married to two women. So Ravid said maybe he's just giving an Eitzah Tova. He's saying a practical piece of information, so he shouldn't have to divorce one. And then what's the problem? Yehoyada, the Coin Guttal Yehoyada. The pasuk clearly says about him he was married to two women. How do you explain that? So maybe you'll say, okay, it wasn't at the same time. He married Rachel, then Rachel died, so then he married Leah. Or he married Rachel, then him and Rachel got a divorce, and then he married Leah. Or he was married to both of them, and then Then he was a regular Kohen, which is fine. He becomes Coin Guttal, he had to divorce one. Or you'll say he was married to both of them, and then what happened was, Erev Yom Kippur, he divorced one. So these are all different ways to explain how Rambam could fit with the pasuk in Divrei Yamim, but he says the Magid Mishnah is really not happy with any of them. So Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein says, I've got a much easier answer. I have a way to explain how Rambam is right, and at the same token, Yehoyada could have, you can read that pasuk about Yehoyada. You know why? Because we misread the pasuk. Look what he says. Avlaemesu, what's the truth of the matter? He ain kan lo reach v'lo tzel kusha. There's not even the scent or the shadow of a question, al Rambam. Meaning, I have a new way to read the psukim, that if you read it like me, Divrei Yamim, there's no contradiction to what Rambam wrote. You don't have to come up with some idea that on Erev Yom Kippur, Yoyada would get a divorce. You don't have to come onto this. If you look closely at those psukim in Divrei Yamim, how do they all begin? It tells us, Ben Sheva Shanim Yoash b'malcho. Yoash, little boy Yoash, was 7 years old when he becomes king. He did everything right in the eyes of God. And Yoyada married two women. Klomar, it doesn't mean Yoyada married two women himself. Rather, Yoyada Hesi Yoash Nashim. Yoyada was the Shadchan. Yoyada was the mentor of Yoash, and he's looking out for this young man who just became king. So what did he do? He found two little tzedekesses, two little tzidkanios, who would be great wives, great queens for this king Yoash. So what does the pasuk mean? The pasuk means Yoyada Hesi Yoash Te Nashim. When it says Vayisa lo Yoyada, it doesn't mean Yoyada married for himself two wives. He's a Coin Guttal. He only had one wife. What does it mean that Vayisa lo Yoyada? Yoyada married him off to two women. How many times have you seen someone? I always thought this was so funny. Someone would be talking about the rabbi, who married off their parents, and they would say, "Yeah, that rabbi married my parents." He didn't marry the parents. He married off the parents. He was the Shadchan. He was the Masader Kedushin, something like that. So that's how he's learning the pasuk. Klomar, it means to say, Yoyada Hesi Yoash Te Nashim. Yoyada was the Shadchan, or he was the Masader Kedushin. He was the mentor, and he was the one who married Yoash two wives. The Yan Ki Kimavur, and it comes out as explaining, The pasuk is saying that Yoash was so young, he didn't know what to look for in a wife. Hesi lo dodo Yoyada. His Yoyada, I didn't realize this, was also his uncle. So it must have been his maternal uncle, because Yoash wasn't a Kohen. He's from Shevet Yehuda. So it must have been his maternal uncle. So Yoyada went ahead and married him off. He found two great girls who would make perfect queens for this young king, and he married them to them. The pasuk's not talking at all that Yoyada himself married two women. The whole nothing there is talking about Yoyada. The pasuk, the whole focus is on Yoash and what he did as a young king. And now maybe you'll ask me, where have you ever seen an expression like this? That when the pasuk says Vayisa lo, that it's not talking about themselves. I'll find you one right in the Chumash. I'll find you a clear proof where you see such an expression could mean that when it says Vayikach lo isha, it doesn't mean that the person married for himself the woman, rather for someone else. Look at Parshas Vayera. After the whole incident when Hagar and Yishmael were kicked out of Avram's house, and Yishmael was going to die in the wilderness, and then the angel comes and opens up Hagar's eyes, and she sees a well, she saves his life, and then the pasuk says, "Vatikach lo imo isha." His mother took for him a woman. Kimuvan Yishmael clearly means Hagar didn't get married to a woman. What it meant was Hagar found a woman for her son Yishmael from Mitzrayim and married her off to Yishmael. She played Shadchanes. That's what she did. So that's what Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein is doing. He's saying this is beautiful. So you can leave it there. Yes, Rambam meant what he said. You don't have to fump around. You don't have to come up with a way to do anything. Rambam meant it. A Coin Guttal should only be married to one woman, not to two. Rambam meant it. What about the fact that we only know about it Yom Kippur? Yeah, you're right. That's where you really run into problems. But Rambam's saying this way you don't have to get divorced on Erev Yom Kippur. Don't do it. Don't get married to more than one woman. That's what he's saying. And what about the fact that in Divrei Hayamim it says Yehoyada married two women? It doesn't mean Yehoyada married two women. It meant Vayisa lo shtei nashim means lo is going on Yoash. It's talking about young King Yoash from Shevet Yehuda, from the Davidic dynasty. Yehoyada was the Shadchan, he was his mentor, and he introduced him to these two fabulous young ladies who would become queens. That's what it means. And now Rambam makes perfect sense. Rambam's no fool. Rambam knew his Divrei Hayamim. Rambam knew his Tanakh far better than we did. So that's what he's saying. You can't tell me Rambam introduced the halacha, which just boom, flies in the face of a flat-out pasuk in Tanakh. That's impossible. Rambam knew his stuff, and that's how Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein saves the day. Now look at this footnote. The footnote says, Ha'ara mitzuyana azos, this fabulous insight, you could tell he was proud of this insight, Hevesi bizmano b'sifrei Torah Tamima ze yoser mishloshim shana. He says, I mentioned it in passing in my earlier work called Torah Tamima, in his commentary there more than 30 years ago. I couldn't find it yesterday. I was trying the other night when I saw this at home, I did find it quoted in his Torah Tamima. And then I just, yesterday when I was looking, I just was having a hard time finding it again. But he did bring it down, and he just brought it down hesitatingly. He didn't bring it down with as much oomph and certainty as he did here. So now he's explaining himself. He goes, more than 30 years ago, I kind of brought up this option as that this is the way to settle everything. But why did I print it again here? If I already brought it up in a brief, it was very briefly how he brought it up, Torah Tamima. He says, I brought it up, but why am I bringing it down here in this Tosafest Bracha in greater detail? Because I want to make the point, as the days have gone on, meaning a lot of times passed in the last 30 years, and I thought about this more. Torah Tamima. A lot of times gone by since I printed that work, Torah Tamima, 30 years ago. And during that time, Re'isi B'Sefer told us Adam, I saw a fabulous work that came out called Told us Adam, Lagon Rav Zalman Mivolozhin, by one of the great Rav Zalman of Volozhin. I believe he was a son of Rav Chaim Volozhiner. And he saw this idea also proposed by Rav Zalman of Volozhin. So once he saw Rav Zalman of Volozhin also proposed this idea, Now I became further convinced that this is the true approach. So he says, I hesitatingly suggested in a very brief fashion in Torah Tamima this idea, but now I'm bringing it down in much greater detail because now I think it's emes. Now I really hold that this is true. Now I've become absolutely convinced. Rashi is very clear in Divrei Hayamim that the pasuk's talking about Yoyada. Yoyada was married to 2 women. And if that's the case, then all right, Rashi can't agree with Rambam. Rambam doesn't have to hold. Rambam has got his own way to learn Divrei Hayamim. He's not bound to the way Rashi learned it. They're equals. So Rashi wants to say Yoyada was married to 2 women. Fine. So he can't have the din of Rambam that a Coin Guttal could never be married to 2 women. Rashi would have to say that, okay, Yoyada did marry 2 women, but then it came Erev Yom Kippur, he had to divorce one of them. That's what Rashi would have to say. But Rambam doesn't have to learn pasuk that way. Rambam learned the pasuk that it never meant that Yoyada was married to 2 women. It meant he married Yoash off to 2 women. These 2 wonderful women that he thought would be the perfect wives for him. That's who he married them off to. So this is, I thought, fantastic. Just to review what happened here is that we saw Rambam. Rambam introduced us to this idea that not just on Yom Kippur could a Coin Guttal not be married to 2 women, but throughout the year he also can't. And then the problem is, where did he get that from? So Ravid says, okay, maybe he just felt it was an Eitzah Tov. It was a good suggestion, because this way you don't have to get divorced, to have the Coin Guttal divorce one of them on Erev Yom Kippur. Okay, but then how do you understand Yoyada? The pasuk clearly says Yoyada was married. He was a Coin Guttal, was married to 2 women. So all sorts of suggestions have been given over the years. No one ever liked them. And he says, here's the easiest one. The pasuk's not talking about Yoyada. It means Yoyada introduced Yoash to 2 women, and Yoash was married to 2 women. That's what he says. And then he found that Zalman of Volozhin offered a very similar answer. Let's share one more source with you. Is that, look what I found. This was on an Or Sameach website, and the Or Sameach says as follows. He says at the end, interesting, he didn't quote Reb Baruch Halevi Epstein. Look who he quotes. He brings down this whole idea with the Rambam and the trouble that Rambam would have with Divrei Hayamim. How do you understand Yoyada? And he says a fascinating solution to this problem is provided by Tzvi Hirsch Chayas. So Maratz Chayas, I didn't look him up, but apparently Maratz Chayas offers this also in the name of Rav Zalman of Volozhin. So look, it's interesting. Look how it's all coming back to Rav Zalman Volozhin again. In contrast to Rashi's explanation that it was Yoyada married 2 women, Rambam will read the passage as reporting that Yoyada, who was the mentor of the king, who ascended the throne at age 7, married Yoash, who was not a Kohen, to 2 women. So that's what he's saying. Yoyada, what does it mean that Vayisalo Shtena should be married 2 women? It doesn't mean Yoyada personally married 2 women. He married Yoash off to 2 women. The historical example is no longer a problem, and Rambam's ruling stands unchallenged. So again, I just thought that was fascinating. So here it is that Tzvi Hirsch Chayas, the Maratz Chayas, he had the same solution as what Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein came up with, and both of them, it seemed like hung their hat on Rav Zalman of Volozhin. They felt like once they saw that he said that, now I felt, okay, secure. This is a good approach. This is a good way to take care of the issue. All right. I want to thank everyone for joining. There was one more source, but we're just out of time, so maybe I'll share that one on Shabbos. So I'm gonna stop the share there and stop the recording.